All right, welcome back to the Academic Yak podcast. We are excited to have you all joining back in with us today. Sorry that the lighting is a little bit different. Animals, our cat knocked over our ring light, so we'll get that adjusted before next week. We also have a couple dogs in here with us. If you hear some miscellaneous noises, some bumping around, don't worry about it. We've got some pets hanging out with us today, which is always fun. Just a few quick reminders before introducing our guest this week. We do have a YouTube channel, so all episodes are live here on Twitch, and then they are also recorded to be uploaded on our YouTube channel. That is Academic Yak on YouTube. And then we also have a Twitter account where we post upcoming episodes and reminders and let you guys know kind of what's going on with the podcast. That is Twitter handle at yak_pod. You can reach out to us there if you're interested in being on the podcast, but if you don't have a Twitter account, you can also reach out to us through email at academicyakpod@gmail.com. So if you'd like to be interested in reaching out and being on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. But without further ado, we do have a new face yet again this week. Quite a treat we have going on because this is actually my mom. So hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us this week. This is my mom, and I will let her introduce herself as our guests typically do.
So my name is Michelle, and I am a graduate student starting my master's degree at the University of Memphis in Memphis, Tennessee. Started the serious part of this journey about 3 years ago. After a life delay, children happened, so
we do that sometimes.
The world kind of went on hold for me academically after that, and picked it up in spits and sputters, and then here we are. So graduated in May with my bachelor's in English with a focus in literature, and picking up with my master's in August. So
yeah, awesome. So with your bachelor's degree, I know kind of similarly to English and really like every degree, some people don't really know what that means, and also there's a lot of different directions that you can go with a degree in English. So when you say an emphasis in literature, just kind of give us a little bit of a I guess just a better understanding what you mean when you say that you have a bachelor's in English and what an emphasis in literature really looks like.
So a bachelor's degree in English is comprised of your basics. Everybody has their core. And instead of focusing on math classes or science classes, I chose to stick with English, my strong suit, and push through with that. And as a focus, you get to have specific areas that you want. And literature is something that I truly love. I like poetry. I like literature itself, the classics. You get into novels or short stories or creative writing, but literature. The actual literature of it, when you talk about things like Shakespeare and O. Henry and even Stephen King, that's literature. Those are the areas that focus is in. And for me, the reasoning behind it is because I intend to teach.
Okay.
So beyond my master's degree, I will be also seeking a PhD so that I can teach on the collegiate level.
Nice. Yeah, and I think that ends up being like a really big part of conversations, especially here on the podcast. People who end up going into graduate school, they either say like, I don't really know what I'm doing, and this is a great next step because it's comfortable and it's more school, and therefore it gives me a delay in time to kind of figure out what the next thing is. Or they're like, I'm PhD bound and I want to teach. And those are the two tracks that we see the most on this podcast. And honestly, you are a non-traditional student, obviously. And our other non-traditional student a few episodes back, Chris, he also was the only other one that came in and was like, no, I had a specific goal in mind and this is how I was going to do it and I knew how to do it and I'm sticking to it. And so I think that there is something to be said. A lot of people get discouraged when they don't go straight out of high school, or even just a couple of years after high school, they get discouraged from going into higher education in any capacity. And I think that having you both on was really important to me because, one, I care about you both a lot, and also because, it shows that there are options and you can go back to school when you're, you can go at 18 or 19, or you can go back at 40, and that's a completely reasonable way to do education. And I think one of the big things that I've noticed about non-traditional students that I've interacted with is that most of you guys, you've already done the things that you don't want to do. So you've already like picked up on the jobs that you don't want to do, and you kind of have played around with different positions similar to Chris had done, in that you've tried a few different things and you've learned what you do like about those things and what you don't like about them. And just obviously knowing you because I'm your child, every time you had jobs in higher education, those seem to be more comfortable to you. Just that environment in general is really, a growth point for you. Heimdall, one of the dogs in here, is having a little grump. He's pouting because he's not getting attention. He's cute. Um, but yeah, so I think that one of the benefits of people who choose to wait, or even people who go for a couple of years, stop, and then come back later, is that you've had that experience, which better informs you about what direction you're heading. And when you get into a program, you have so much clarity and direction of what you want to do, and that intentionality really, it gives you a better sense of direction and a better sense of comfort going into these programs. So I think that, I know that this is going to be one that a lot of people watch that's recorded later, but I think it's really important just having more non-traditional faces who are determined to go through with this degree program. It shows that diversity and the importance of like, it's okay to just wait and take your time. And I think you kind of harped on that with me and Jake a lot. And Jake is my brother, and we're very different. I went straight into college and stuck with it, and Jake did not. And he was like most 20-year-old boys, very anxious about leaving college and how frustrating it was. And I think because you had taken a similar path to him in that sense, you were able to kind of give him more comfort in knowing that, like, I mean, if you want to do it later, come back and do it later. If you don't want to do it at all, don't do it at all, and that's okay.
It ended up not being the path for him just because he had other interests and they were not collegiately bound. And there are a lot of people out there who do. You get into college and then discover, wow, this really sucks. I don't want to keep doing school. I've already done this for 12 years and I'm ready to just get out there and do something else, be it taking a military path or a trade school, or just jumping straight into the workforce. Exactly. And with my situation, I did a little bit of school. It probably wasn't the best choice for me at the time because the way I did it just ended up not working out real well.
Yeah.
Other than, kids. I got kids. I
Yeah.
got two kids that are y'all are both great, and you've done really well for yourself, and that's something I've been very proud of both of you in the individual paths that you've taken.
Yeah.
And it's been hard. Being a non-traditional student was it was daunting. It was easier when I was working at the university the first go around that I did there locally where we were living, and so that helped a lot. And also being a small town in our hometown, having that encouragement from the staff and faculty that were people that I knew.
Yeah.
That helped to get me reestablished into the right mind frame of this is not impossible and it can be done in smaller steps.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of benefit to working at a university and going to school there.
Yeah.
This is a little bit different situation. I have progressed further on down the line. I'm not employed with the university and then a student.
Yeah.
I'm a student who is now a student worker with the university. And that's where a little bit of that life experience has come in handy because I got some IT certifications for a while.
Yeah.
And I've been able to work in the IT department, which has put me in a really great situation and made that a comfortable transition as well, moving on into this.
Yeah, and I think that, that first step of going back when Jake and I were young, it's okay, bonks. When Jake and I were really young and you tried to go back at our, okay, whenever we were young and you were trying to do that, one of the big things was that even though it was a small town and it was encouraging and that like you knew everyone, I felt like you also just weren't getting what you needed out of it because of that same reason. And I think that can be kind of challenging for people too. And I think that, that just leans into the importance of finding a program that's a really good fit for you. Because a lot of universities, and I'm sure get a little bit of conversation from this, but a lot of people, a lot of universities do things very similarly, and you're going to get a good degree from most institutions that you go for and be able to get a job and turn around from that. But I think that it's a lot of personality and a lot of, what campus is comfortable to you and what staff is comfortable to you, and not only who's comfortable, but who's going to actually like push you to go and do the things that you really need to do to succeed. And I think that the path you took was it's non-traditional, but also like in so many different ways it was not traditional. And so I think that you just kind of had to pick and pull and piece together what worked best for you. And it's just finally you've gotten through that bachelor's. So now you're transitioning to the master's program. So tell us what your master's program is and kind of what you're wanting it to look like and shape into over the next 2 years.
Again, it is another, you get a choice, right?
Mhm.
So you go in there and creative writing, literature, and I'm sticking with the literature track, but I'm going to focus a little more in the area of medieval studies, medieval writing, and mythology. Between the two, I don't really want to choose between the
Yeah.
two. I like them both equally, and they are of great interest to me. And so it makes it an easy choice for me to stick with, and they're very intertwined as well. When you get into looking into the way literature works in mythology through the ages, that is, it started somewhere. It started with an oral tradition. The myths were passed down person to person to person to person, and then eventually got written down. So it really is the origin story of literature as we know it today.
Yeah.
The advancement of technology is what has allowed, we've written words. So then they started writing things down, and then typesets, and then it became more popular and more accessible, and that made all the difference in where we are even today, because now you have electronic literature. So that's a big topic also in the literature community as well. So that's sticking in that area, sticking in that zone of comfort for me and interest is where I'm gonna just pull with the strong suit. I'm not looking to get out there and do something exploratory. I'm not going to be an astronaut. Okay, math is not my friend, so stick with my strong suits, and that's where it is. So
and I think one thing that I was thinking about when you're talking about how you kind of go back and look at the origin of literature as we know it and how it ties into that storytelling aspect of mythology and how a lot of it turned into like, oh, we have to find a way to preserve this, and that's kind of how that all started. But I'm thinking too, like how different research really looks in your field versus people we've had on here so far, because we've had communication scholars, so social sciences. So you get a lot of like surveying and a lot of focus grouping and a lot of interviews, and how do we still turn that into quantifiable data of like how many data points can we get and how many of them are similar and how do we run stats on that. And then we've had a natural sciences person come on, and of course they do more traditional research, as people know it, getting in the lab and testing things out and goofing off with equipment. And I say goofing off, I know that it's serious, but most of the time they're goofing off and having fun, and then things happen sometimes. So, you have that side of it. And then we have a public health person, and they still kind of adhere more to social sciences, so they're still doing the surveying and things like that. But when you move more into the liberal arts in this way, it looks very different for you guys. And honestly, I know that we see a lot in movies and talk a lot about how, oh, well, they're researching because they're scientists, and you see the bubbles and the ridiculous thing, chemistry typically is what we're seeing on TV. We do actually see a lot of literature portrayed on the liberal arts side as well, with people sitting in libraries for hours and hours and hours, but they always manage to bring that back to the natural sciences. Oh, I need to go read up on, Einstein or Feynman and figure out what they did so I can replicate it or move on from it. But really that first part of that, from my understanding, is more what you all do in English and literacy. So talk a little bit about how you're going to do that.
I'm gonna keep doing, it just kind of never ends. So remember that ugly research paper that everybody had to do as a junior in English, and then as a senior in English, and it's just that over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But then you also get the added twist of
I feel similarly. I could never do that, even though I still do it.
I mean, some of us enjoy it and some of us don't. Some people like sitting at an abacus and doing math the hard way.
Yeah.
I don't even want to do it the easy way. Excel is my best friend. But anyway, the addition of other people's research is where it starts to get interesting, and that there are aspects of research in probably all the fields. I'm just going to assume it's in all the fields, because people have studies, right? You've done a study. someone else has done a study. Those get published. Well, when they get published, it sheds new light on aspects of whatever it is that you're studying at the time. Literature is no different. And there are, well, let's just, because I'm doing some Norse study right now, there are a lot of things that have come to light over the last decade, 2 decades-ish, that are exposing things in Norse history that is bringing a lot more attention to it. And I mean that beyond the obvious Avengers, Marvel, Thor, with the comic book series and the movies. That's obviously bringing a lot more interest into it in the public eye socially, because you know, that's interesting and people like it. Video games like the God of War that had the Norse impact, right? But there are aspects of that that people researched in order to make those things more real, right? And it's a crossover because you have anthropological input as well as literature input. Well, the anthropology side of it is where mythology really falls into, because that is the explanation that cultures were giving for how things happened. That's how they came up with gods like Thor and Odin and Frigg and Balder. To explain all the crap that was going on. Well, there are archaeological digs, anthropological histories that they are looking into for those cultures, that as they find more bits and pieces in these digs, it brings to light more of the information that they're reading from where these were recorded. Unfortunately, Norse is one of those cultures where things didn't get written down for a long time. So when it did start to be written down, it was written down from an aspect when the culture was beginning to change. Christianity was becoming a real strong, impressive force in that region of the world, which is why it started getting written down, because with the influx of the religious sect, they were writing. They started recording things that hadn't been previously recorded. So there's some twists there that they are starting to learn from discoveries in these digs, that, oh, this is not really how, I mean, it is, but it isn't. Things like my thesis that I'm working on, where they've pulling in the aspects of the gods and the giants, and it's not a matter of the gods were all good and the giants were all evil. It's the gods were the order in the universe, and the giants were the chaos element. So that conflict between them was how a lot of things were explained. But when it was written down, it was, well, it can't be chaotic unless it's evil. So these have got to be evil. Well, the changes in that research, the changes that research has instituted in the way it's interpreted, are where it impacts things like my research, because those underlying elements becoming exposed as being different change the way we interpret the literature. So I know that was a big, huge roundabout way to get there, but that's really how it comes about. And it also puts a lot of light on the way that literature isn't just secular. It doesn't stand on its own. It is the written aspect of culture. So a lot of anthropology has to be taken into consideration for several aspects of it, because it's how we found out. Some other papers that I've done back in Justinian Byzantine days, they had a scribe in court, and he wrote what they told him to, but then he wrote this hidden writing also that really laid to waste that entire empire, that reign that he had. It was crazy. But it showed both aspects. So even though he would have been killed if they had found out if he had done it because of the time frame, it shed a lot of light on the way history can be impacted from the perspective. But it's also literature. It's not just history. It is the written aspect of history and the stories and the way they come
And
out.
we see kind of that push and pull in other areas of research as well, where you see, two studies that look at exactly the same thing and they have conflicting results. And, people are always like, oh, well, it's statistics. Like, the math is always is always just the truth, and it's just like computer coding, or looking at how things were written down at the time. The person who creates that, they pull what they need to pull for that to look the way that it does. And that's not to say that any one of those things is untrue. It just means that there's always going to have to be some kind of consideration about who it is that did it and what their end goal was, because it does inherently influence the conversation. And so, yeah, that's crazy. I don't really think too much about literature in any regard. I never have. And I know that that's been a big difference between us. And Jake always followed a lot more with Dad and the math side of things. And I was just awkwardly kind of caught somewhere in between where I'm like, y'all are both weird. I don't want to do any of this. Um, but when you were mentioning about how we're seeing kind of this re-encouragement to look into mythology in a new way, especially with things like Avengers and the series Loki specifically, it kind of brought to mind how we're seeing Disney kind of monopolize on Norse gods, and how we're seeing a lot of mythology being capitalized on by them. And specifically, I had seen recently a lawsuit come through from Disney that is hitting the pagan community specifically very hard, because they have had, years of their businesses have focused on, promoting things that are, statues and cards and books and tapestries and artwork that I guess continue to immortalize these different gods and different cultures, and Loki is one of them. Loki is not a new concept. Loki was not created just for the purposes of the Avengers or the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think I think it will be really interesting to see how the research in the next decade will start to tie in new media and its impact on how new media has formatively changed generations' understandings of people like Loki or gods like Loki, because people are kids now who are watching this and seeing this and being heavily influenced by this, and their families deciding to go and explore different aspects of paganism. They're going to write something someday. There's going to be kids that write something someday, and they're going to have influence from what they're seeing now and that. So that recording of things is going to look very different. And I think the research that is coming in the next 10 to 20 years is going to be influenced heavily by what we're seeing from Disney specifically, and how they're portraying things.
The concept of it being entertainment solely now, instead of being as a matter of a precursor to scientific exploration, for lack of better terminology, because that's really what it ended up being.
Mm-hmm.
There are, having read Joseph Campbell and different anthropologists in doing a lot of my research. Mm-hmm. The they didn't have scientific method yet. They weren't using the same ideologies that we have today. So this was really their concept of the world around them, the explanation for the universe, the explanation for stars and earthquakes and volcanoes and bad weather, and even tribal differences.
Yeah.
So that was all of that kind of hodgepodged into one. And that's, they would assign, okay, well, this God takes care of this area, and this God takes care of this area. And these giants are kind of responsible for this sort of thing. And these giants are responsible for this sort of thing.
Right.
And trolls and dwarfs. And they brought it all together. Well, it's just the explanation, in another universe in another million years, they may look back on what we're doing right now and say, wow, they really believed in this electron thing. That's how they got electricity.
Right.
When it's really something off the wall that we just couldn't possibly understand.
Yeah.
So, that's it's an interesting twist that now what stood for science so many hundreds of years ago is purely entertainment.
Yeah.
And, well, That's not true. It is mostly entertainment in the greater aspect of the way it's being portrayed at this point in time. There are still so many different religious aspects to it that it would be unfair to just ignore them at all. But the greater aspect and the greater impact that it's having right now in today's society is through the cinematic viewpoint, and especially the powerhouse that's Disney.
Yeah.
And with Marvel and Disney having combined, it's even greater. So, I mean, Disney's taken Grimm's fairy tales and turned them into, you know, the fairy princesses that we all know and love, in Sleeping Beauty and Snow White and that type of thing. And now they're reaching further with Marvel, and having done so many pieces on Thor and Loki and their particulars. So now that's all being wound in and presented in a different viewpoint. It's not, I've not been completely off the wall going, wait a minute, that's just, but it's also not completely true to the aspects of, say, the Eddas and the sagas and the way that it was portrayed.
It'll just be interesting to see how things develop, especially in the research world, and how, like I said, like younger generations, they're testing out different parts of life, and I think, you know, maybe even the vegan community will benefit a little bit from it, because maybe they'll see a little bit of an influx of interest and whatnot. But, you know, ultimately we see historically Christianity tends to envelop those communities, unfortunately. But so moving in, you're looking at mythology and looking at Norse literature, and you're researching those things, and how there are overlaps and gaps and things that are going on in that world. But when you finish your master's, you'll have a thesis out of it, and your ultimate goal, you've said already, is to get a PhD so that you can teach. So I would imagine that there's not very many programs available for getting a PhD and that sort of thing. So kind of, I guess, talk me through what your next steps will look like after completing that master's project.
During the master's, there's going to have to be a lot of looking at, and that process has actually already begun.
Yeah.
Because mythology is kind of a greater envelope, and medieval studies is obviously bigger than that.
Yeah.
But, well, I say bigger. It's been more popular, so there are more options to look at through medieval studies than there is for mythology. Unless you're focusing in one of the classical studies of Greek or Roman, Latin. Those are kind of the gold standard, right? Egyptian is right up there behind that, and the Victorian era put a huge push into that one, so it got a lot more attention more recently than Greek and Roman studies have. But beyond that, for me personally, looking at studies that do programs that have studies specifically for mythology, and most specifically in the Norse mythology, their entire culture, which was strongly based around that. So those programs there aren't very many of them in the United States.
Yeah.
Medieval studies, there's probably 3 or 4 times as many that have that program available at a PhD level, doctoral level. Now, if you look globally, you go over into Europe, you start thinking a lot more, because that's kind of their stomping ground.
Yeah.
So there are options out there. They are daunting, to say the least, from, you know, senior year of bachelor's program to, what do you mean, Norway? You know, it's not just the largeness of the picture of what you're looking at, but it's also, where can you get the best bang for your buck? Where am I going to get the most accurate and the best level of education? Because if I'm going to be presenting myself as an educator, I want to be plausible.
Yeah.
You know, I want to be relevant.
Yeah.
And I've got to sell myself. So where I choose to do that program makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And it's just like if you're choosing a school as an athlete.
Yeah.
You know, these athletes look at these schools and they're like, okay, well, this one ranked here in the NCAA and they went to the Final Four in basketball and they went to, you know, they ravaged the Pac-10 or they ruled in the SEC. You know, they look at those things and it's no different in any field. Literature being the same.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a bigger field than I anticipated it being, which makes it both interesting and daunting at the same time.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot to look forward to in the next year. I will say, being a year ahead of you in a master's program, the thesis will come very quickly. So make sure you prepare yourself. But, you know, the classes are great. And I think one of the big differences, too, between undergraduate and graduate that kind of surprised me is that in our program, anyway, and seemingly somewhat similar in Nick's program, too, is just it's a lot less lecture and a lot more do. And I've always heard that, and I guess I just wasn't really paying attention. I don't know, or I just didn't know what to expect. But in our program, and I think it will be similar for you, it was a lot more like, here's the reading, do it outside of class, which is normal even for undergrad. But when you come to class, it's not, okay, I'm going to walk you through it and I'll ask you some questions. It is, tell me what you just read. And then, even then, most of the instructors don't talk a whole lot during class. It's a lot of the students interpreting and pulling things apart. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes in that field, because I feel like it's so studied and there's so much out there. I feel like you'll have a lot more to pull from than a young field like communication, which is relatively new to the academic world. But
theory seems to be playing a big part in that. There's requirements for several theory classes for me, and which, you know, there are in most of the fields, but theory is something that we haven't really done a whole lot of as undergrad, and that's going to be a new pull there. I've had a few instructors that did try to set that up a little more, where the same situation we were talking about, where you get into class and you've had these assigned readings, so now we're going to talk about them, and by we I mean you. So here's the question. Now you guys get to discuss it and tell me what you got out of it, and talk to each other and get the different aspects of it. And those were some of my favorite classes. And that's another reason why I really feel strongly about staying on the path for teaching, because it was so much more like a classroom setting, and we were each teachers to each other, and that was very encouraging for me mentally, as far as, I really think I'm doing the right thing here, because this feels right, and this is more the structure of what will be happening along the lines when I get that far. So when I'm 60 and standing up in front of the classroom and teaching you young whippersnappers how to do this, you know, we can have those discussions.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that you would like to say to anybody about their academic journey? I know Chris was pretty encouraging towards non-traditional bound students, but do you have any tips or tricks or things you'd like to leave them with?
You know, life's going to take you where it's going to take you. I knew I wanted to teach. In junior high, I didn't. I thought I wanted to be a law. No, I don't think law school is what I'm going to be able to pay for. So we didn't do that route. This would be a whole different story otherwise. But you know, once I got through high school and my junior high English teacher, which you guys didn't get to have, although we all
high school ones.
not junior high, junior. She was our junior English teacher, but she had a really bad car wreck, and so she didn't make it. That's why you guys didn't have her. Otherwise, I'm sure she still would have been there. But she was very influential for me, and she did teach a lot of our classes and on that collegiate type level. So when you find something that draws you that way, investigate it. Ask questions. Go find someone who does it and watch and look and listen and learn. And you'll discover what you want to do. And if it works out that you can do the collegiate path, go find the right, the right people. You don't know who the right people are necessarily right off the bat, but you have high school counselors. There are admissions counselors at all the universities, and you don't have to start off at a major university. You don't have to run off to Harvard first thing right out the box. From graduation to Harvard doesn't have to be that first step. And family life can make a big difference in that. Being siblings, parents, or having that, right off the bat heartthrob that you end up getting married and then end up not necessarily doing, or maybe you just need to go to work for a while.
Yeah.
You can burn out. High school can burn you out just as easily as anything else can. So, you'll find that path. But the big thing that most people don't do is ask questions. Find someone who's doing what you're interested in doing and ask questions.
Yeah.
If you love working on cars, every town has a mechanic shop.
Yep.
Be that annoying teenager that's hanging out by the mechanic shop at the bay and asking questions and learning. And if your granddad does it, fine. Go find what they're doing and learn there. If you enjoy cooking, there are restaurants, there are, even people in the cafeteria. I know it seems hokey, but
they
cook all the time. You will learn something.
Yeah.
And you're not going to start off as a grand chef.
Yeah.
You're not going to be Gordon Ramsay right out of high school.
No.
And you start somewhere. So just ask questions. Ask questions.
Yeah, I think not being complacent is definitely the best thing that you can do for yourself. And, to echo some of that, there really are people out there who their entire jobs are dedicated to helping you figure out what works for you. And those people are intimidating and they have big personalities. And I will say it because I was an admissions counselor for 2 years for an institution. And my job was to be loud and boisterous and annoying and get your attention. But the most productive thing that I did was when people had questions, like those are my favorite people because I can answer those questions for them, and I learned to figure out the ones who couldn't ask questions, what questions they might have. And so ask questions. I think that's probably the best advice that you could definitely give somebody is ask questions. And if you apply to Harvard and you don't get in and you get in somewhere else instead, your local state institution, then that's where you get in instead. And it will be a great time and you will figure it out and you'll come out with the same degree. And it may just put you on a better journey. That things really do kind of happen for a reason. And I think that you'll make it work. I think that's the moral of the story here. Because sometimes you and your daughter end up in grad school at the same time, and that's okay. It's just one stressed out household altogether. Well, thanks for being on. We're certainly excited to have you on here. Shout out to Mason who came in here and supported you, brought you over here, hung out with us in here. He's in the background. And of course, as always, my husband Nick for running all of the tech stuff in the background, making sure nothing went too crazy. We had a couple of weird tech things, but we worked through them quickly. Thanks for watching this, whether it be now or in the recording later. We appreciate the support. Check us out on Twitter, yak_pod on Twitter. That is where we post upcoming episodes. You can reach out if you're interested in being on the episode. You can also reach out via email, academicyakpod@gmail.com. And come hang out with us sometime. We would love to see you in the chat asking questions. But thanks for being here, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye.